Starting to record now. All right. Let's see. So, recall, chapter 6. We looked at, optimization and trade. We don't need to go back to this level. We do need to go, where did we go? It was this page right here. Nope, it was this one. Here we are. That's what we needed. Labor market. Here we go. So we had people choosing between leisure time and money, so material goods and time to enjoy those material goods, and they would balance. They would make their choice for how much to work based on some balance between there. That was the first part of it, and then we showed. Remember, we talked about how the labor market. We have suppliers are the workers, which is backwards from most economic models, right? Usually the suppliers are the firms. So the suppliers are workers because they are the ones who provide the labor. And then we have demanders are firms. So if the suppliers are workers and the demanders are firms, then we will have, remember that the law of demand here is that as the price of labor goes down, means firms will hire more workers. And if the price of labor goes down, it means workers don't want to work more, or workers work less, workers supply less. It's harder to find an employee if the money that you are paying them, if you're paying them less. It's harder to find an employee if you're paying them less. So here we go. Now, one more thing, and I don't believe that we talked about this. Oh yeah, here we are, back at what we were discussing before. So we had this example that we used before where we had these shifting supply and demand curves. So recall that things that will shift the demand curve would be like in this example from The Expanse, where we have, we had Mao Kwiatkowski is colonizing a new moon on Neptune. What does this do to the labor market for terraformers? Well, we need more terraformers. So what does that mean? That means that at any given wage, we're actually going to need more terraformers, right? Because suddenly the market for terraformers, we need more of them. Because of that, the demand curve will actually shift over. So we need to attract workers, and intuitively what happens is these wages will go up, and the amount of labor, the number of hours worked also goes up. Notice that nothing here has happened to the supply curve. That is, there's the same number of workers. Workers still have these reservation wages. Someone will switch over to terraforming, for example, if the wage gets to this level right here that I'm dotting, and they won't switch to terraforming until they get to that point. So as soon as this demand curve reaches that spot right there, then that last worker will join in, right? So nothing has happened to the labor force itself, but what has happened is that we need more workers, and so we're going to have to pay more money to get them. Let's see. Then we also looked at this one. New planets are reachable that need no terraforming, but it does need miners, explorers, farmers, etc. What happens to the wages and number of terraformers as a result? So we had two possible explanations there that we looked at. First, workers may leave the terraforming job on their own if we have this terraforming we have this terraforming market. Suddenly it is actually just more lucrative to not do this really hard work, and they can go and enjoy the open air and not be living under a bubble or whatever. So workers may just voluntarily switch over to these other jobs. So the supply would go down. You're going to have to pay them more. There are fewer workers available because they're switching over to these other jobs. You'll have to pay them more to keep them on hand. So if the supply if the supply has a downward shift, then we will have the wages are going to go up and the number of workers is going to go down. They don't want to do this job anymore. So think about something like nuclear power plant workers after the Chernobyl incident, right? Like suddenly very educated engineers don't want to be in nuclear power plants. So holding all else constant. So you would have to pay the ones who are going to stay more. Let's see. Then we had another option that was people can't just leave. Like this would be an example that's more in line probably with the Expanse universe. The companies are the ones who are holding all the cards, and they see colonizing as more profitable than terraforming, so they just switch over to these other things, and these jobs dry up. So the terraforming jobs go away. Workers now, if they want to stay in terraforming, they're not going to make as much money, and there's not going to be as many jobs. So both go down. So then remember, and this is the key one, right? Now that we've sort of looked back over the basics again from the last couple of weeks, very quickly, remember we had these, we were looking at reasons that we shouldn't see wage disparities between jobs that have identical requirements. And this is a big, quote. If they're identical requirements and they're basically identical jobs. So we're talking like working at Walmart versus working at Target, right? Like you're doing the same job. You don't need any additional training to switch over. Here we use as just a basic, or as a sort of toy example here. We might have miners and farmers, and say that they require similar amounts of training or whatever. Like if you're going to be a farmhand versus be a rock breaker, then those jobs might have just the same amount of training. One you're swinging a pickaxe, the other one you're using a shovel and a rake. So if we had farmers making $40,000 a year and miners making $80,000 a year, then what we would expect to see is that, let's see, where did we go here? We would expect to see, I should erase this one and start over, huh? Yeah, that's a lot of lines. That's what we're going to do. All right, here we go. Erase the pink. There we go. All righty. Now, we have so we have, these are going to be on the same scale, right? This will be like $2 an hour, and this will be like $30 an hour. This will be 2 and 30, right? So you could draw a straight line, and it'll go all the way across here. These are the same wage. So the graphs are scaled identically on the wages axis. Now, what's going to happen if the wage of miners is significantly higher than the wage of farmers? Well, the farmers don't need to get any additional training, and they're already in pretty good physical shape, right? They know, like, I can use a shovel, I can swing an axe, it'll be fine. Then they'll start leaving this farming job to go make twice as much money. They won't be able to make quite this much, right? Because this is already equilibrium. but they might be able to make a little bit less. And so what will happen is these farmers will move from this making $40 an hour over here to become miners making $80,000. Start moving for like a $40,000 benefit, right? So you're gonna make like a $40,000. You're gonna get this $40,000 a year benefit for switching over to mining. So people will do that. Now they won't do this forever because these markets are gonna, like, the supply curves are gonna shift. So what happens here is people are leaving farming. So if they're leaving farming, that means that we have a supply shift going this way. And let's see, I guess we can use, yeah, fine. She's black here. So the supply shifts this way. Remember what happens with a supply shift? Something happens to the workers or the employee pool. There aren't as many workers there anymore. They left to become miners. Well, now the supply of miners has increased. So now these guys move over to here. And eventually, we would expect to see a new set of equilibria between these two, where it pays exactly the same to be a miner as it does to be a farmer. So we have wages moving down for miners, wages moving up for farmers because the job skills are so similar. So job skills similar. But it still pays well. Job skills are similar, but pays more. People switch until there's no benefit to switching. Okay? So as I explained before in the last time we did this, it raises wages for farmers, lowers it for miners. When farmers become miners, there's shifts in supply for both. Now, suppose that these wages never equalize, right? So why might this happen in a community where there's no discrimination? So we would see, in this case, that it pays 1.25 times 1.25 times, let's see, the farmer wage is equal to the miner wage, right? So being a miner pays 25% more than being a farmer. And that gap never goes away. So if it doesn't go away, we have these things that are called compensating differentials. Now, compensating differentials are just like non-monetary benefits to having some job. So remember we talked about last time that one of those non-monetary benefits, one of the biggest ones, would be if you're a miner, you're working in a dark cave and you're going to get black lung. And if you are a farmer, you're getting to work in the open air, and also you get really nice fresh food all the time. So examples: fresh food, fresh air. These are essentially worth 25% of a miner's wage. Well, actually, if we're being precise, it would be 20%. These are worth 20% of a miner's wage, right? Because if it's 25% more, then it's 20% less. Don't worry about that, though. Right. So, essentially, we're at 20% of miner's wage. So we can now put a price tag on fresh fruit, on fresh food, and fresh air of, like, say we're going between let's see, say miner makes 50,000, right? Say the miner makes 50,000 a year. We're putting a price tag of fresh food and fresh air for the year of $10,000. This is how much a worker is willing to pay in order to have fresh food and fresh air, and not get black lung and be in the dark all the time and all that noise. Okay, so we're going to use this. We're going to use this number, this sort of compensating differential, as a building block to explain taste-based discrimination. Does anybody have any questions about this so far? No, that is not what I wanted. I want to be up here. All right, so far we've just done review. Okay, there we go. Now I actually need to see if there are any people in here. Look into. Okay. All right, cool. Let's do it then. Moving on. Taste-based. There we go. Okay, there's that. Here's this. All right. What the hell? There we are. What is going on here? Okay. Then we are going to go ahead and move back to the new stuff. All right. As I okay. Digging the emojis, everybody. That's great. All right. So we have. Where did we go? There it is. Taste-based discrimination. So what is taste-based? What is it? Employers know that a minority group is equally productive but still pays them less. or doesn't hire them. Now, it may be the case that a taste-based discriminator will never hire someone who is from a minority group or a particular minority group. So what we do in that case is we just set, if we're going to model this, how do we model this like doesn't hire? So remember I said you would pay someone less so this would be like men and women. Someone really doesn't like working with women, and so maybe he wouldn't hire them under almost any circumstances. But what we do in this case is we set the wage that they would pay super low. Right? So if a woman said that she would come into his plant and or come into his hat factory and make hats for free because she's bored or whatever, I'm just using this to model it, right? He would probably hire her. He would probably let that happen. If not, then we might even set a negative reservation wage, like she would have to pay him to come in and work. But either way, we don't usually do like the way that we model this so that we can still do our pretty graphs that we like to use in economics is we just say this employer would only hire a woman if the wage was like negative $2 an hour, right? If she would pay him to work there. Interestingly, we do have these paid you have to pay to get into internships. Have you ever heard of these? It's ridiculous. So there's the free internships, of course, but then there's also internships that you have to pay to get into. If a man doesn't, Raj. Okay, so if a man does not like working with a woman, is that taste-based? Depends on what you mean by does not like. If like working with a woman is just something that makes it like, if he behaves in the way that we're about to model, then yeah, that's right. If he is not hiring a woman because he is taking a person's gender as some sort of a signal of productivity, then that's actually going to be called statistical discrimination. But we'll get to that. That's sort of the distinction. With statistical discrimination, I'm taking gender to be sort of a signal of productivity. And typically, and the reason that we don't see statistical discrimination going away is because statistical discriminators usually benefit from doing so if they're playing the numbers game with large enough numbers. So if it turns out, for example, that a woman is like 60% more likely to leave a job within 5 years because she's between the ages of 25 and 30. And if somebody is using that as a decision on whether to hire somebody on, if they keep doing that, it turns out they'll actually profit from it because the data shows that women are more likely to leave, usually because of societal pressure to raise the children, right? So, but getting back to what we're talking about with this taste-based discrimination, how do we model it? We model taste-based discrimination. Luke, is that John Finley? All right. Yes! Okay, so let's see. How do we model taste-based discrimination? We have So people have preferences, right? I'm just going to throw a truism out there, and we're going to use that to start to model this. People have preferences. So if I were to pour a cup of, do I have orange up here? Yes, I do. We got some nice, no, damn it. Go. There. There we are. There's a cup of orange juice. And let's see, this will be a cup of grape juice. And here's a cup of grape juice. Let's see. We have OJ and then grape juice. You are all going to have some sort of a preference for one of these. If I put these two in front of you and say, you have to drink one and then I'll drink the other one, and you have to pick. We're not playing a poison game, I promise. Right. So if these two drinks came to the table, that is purple, right? What color did I make that? Oh yeah, that was blue. Thank you. That's a good catch there, Jadzia. These are the important issues. All better. We good now? All right. So the way that we'll do this is I would prefer the orange juice. So I'll put this little preference signal between here. This means I like OJ more than grape. And for simplicity's sake, we'll keep strength of preference as something that is. Dang it! What happened here? Here, we'll do nice purple highlighter here. Now it's glowing grape. All right. I like OJ more than grape. In fact, I would pay like $2 for a glass of OJ and only 75 cents for grape. Not a big fan of grape. So, all things being equal, if you're going to give me 2 cups of juice, then the strength of my preference for orange juice is $1.25, right? So we use that as the way that we model discrimination. So in the case of juice, this is pretty benign, right? This doesn't matter. Benign discrimination. This is like sort of a kind of discrimination. I discriminate against grape juice. I wouldn't pay as much for my grape juice. Then we have obviously harmful discrimination, where it's employers choosing workers like this. Is not benign. Harmful to some workers. So what does that look like? We have, I believe the example in the book used a red person. We have a red person, and we have a blue person. And each of them produces 1,000 per day. and productivity, right? So each of them works at your factory, and they create $1,000 worth of stuff per day. And so if the employer has some sort of a preference here, right? Given that the employer knows that each of them will produce $1,000 worth of stuff a day, the employer will still choose the blue person every time. Employer prefers blue. This is taste-based discrimination. Okay. Now, here's the other thing. Remember how I was saying that suppose we observe that there's a factory owner who will only hire white people, right? It's not to say that this employer would never hire non-white people. It's just that the employees would have to take such a low wage in order to work there if they were not white that they would never do it. So that's the way that we model taste-based discrimination. They set the wage offer so low that they would never hire them. Whether or not that's actually true, right? Like it may be the case that a person will never let, like a discriminating factory owner may never let a non-white person come in the door and work there. If somehow we're modeling this as though the factory owner would have some wage at which they would consider letting those people come in. So, say they typically have to pay white people like $23 an hour. They would now while it may turn out that they're never taking people in, right? They're never letting non-white people work there. It may be that they would if they could get away with paying them $5 an hour, which is below the legal minimum wage or something like that. So we can use that to model and put a price tag on discrimination. So we can say, how important is it to this employer to discriminate? Well, apparently this person will pay $100,000 a year so that they get to be a racist, right? So how does this work? We continue. So here we would in this case we're saying that say it's only it's not a very strong discrimination. Dollar signs as far as is what I mean by strong. Say that we would pay this guy $12 an hour, and we would pay this guy $11.50 an hour, right? If I'm hiring two people or two groups of people, right? If I'm hiring, we have white people, and then we have white workers, and we also have black workers, for example. If the white workers are making $12 an hour and the black workers are making 50 cents an hour, then we could model that as as taste-based discrimination, because we're saying that if there were white workers who were willing to work for $11.50 an hour, they would definitely have taken them. There are only all the white workers were only willing to work for $12 an hour, so we took as many of them as we could at $12 an hour, and then we hired black workers at $11.50 an hour, because the white workers don't want to work for that little, and the black workers are having to take the lower paying jobs because of this taste-based discrimination, right? So the threshold of how much money they're willing to accept is lower because of this discrimination. Now, here's the thing. We have, let's see. In this case, this employer pays $0.50 per hour per worker to discriminate. So we're going to turn this into some algebra here, right? We have, let's see, we have wages, if you're black, are equal to wages if you're white. So remember that if we go back to our very basic model, let's see here. How did I model this before? Yes, like that. Okay. So recall, we have the labor demand curve. And here we have talked about, we have let's see, the white workers are working for $12 an hour. Black workers are working for $150 an hour. Right. So what's happening here? Suppose that we have a firm that has only hired white people. We would have this area up here would be their profit, right? Because if we do basic economic modeling, then a firm will continue to hire workers to continue to produce more products right up until that last worker makes them nothing, or until the next worker would actually lose them money, right? So the first worker that you have, we would have, like, say this is the first worker, then this whole area here, everything, this is, remember, this is wage, and then this would be, this area right here would be selling price of, I guess we'll say, $18 per hour. So this worker is making you $18 an hour, and you're paying them $12. Then this first worker, this number one here, is making you $6 per hour. Okay? $6 an hour. That's 18 minus 12. Or let's see, we do productivity minus wage, or 18 minus 12, right? So every hour, this worker is making $18 worth of stuff, and you're only having to pay them 12. And that's the first worker. Now you hire the second worker. The second worker is bringing in, let's see, 16, is producing $16 an hour worth of stuff, and is able to, and you only have to pay that person $12. So one worker, two workers, this is going to be $4 an hour. This is 16 minus 12. And then, let's see, three workers would be $2 an hour, say. And then four workers, you're actually, you're not making any money, but you would still hire that worker. That's usually the assumption, is that we hire the last worker, even though they're making zero profit, and that's just for simplicity in modeling. Usually there's some other external benefit to producing at a higher level, so you'll continue to do that. Okay, so why did we do all that? Well, look at what happens if you're willing to hire, this is white up here. Look what happens if you're willing to hire black workers. Well, then we would have $6.50 per hour now, right? Because you're capturing not only this amount up on top here, you're also getting everything in here. All of this also counts as profit. So you get $6.50 an hour for the first one, for the first worker. And then you get the second worker is going to be $4.50. The third worker is going to be $2.50. The fourth worker is going to be 50 cents. And the fifth worker would cost you money, so you'd be negative 150. So we wouldn't hire that one. So we would still hire the same number of workers, just pay them less, and then you get an extra $2 per hour of profit, right? So why would this ever happen? Well, we're saying that if this little mini factory is open for 8 hours a day, then this employer is willing to pay 2 times $8, $16 per day to discriminate. So we have a strength of preference here now. A taste-based discriminator, taste-based discriminator pays a premium of $16 per day to discriminate. Now, because of that, we would expect non-discriminators to then hire up the cheaper labor and put this discriminator out of business. So if we're going to put this, if we want to try to model this algebraically, I think it's worth our time. So we will do that real quickly. Remember that, say that let's see here. A non-discriminator, right? Well, let me scroll. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Non-discriminator will hire the cheapest labor until WB is equal to WW, right? So this would be a case of a white worker and a black worker. If we have a non-discriminator, they will hire the cheapest labor every time. And remember what we said about labor pools and shifts and supply and all that. As you continue to hire more people that'll work for cheaper and will produce the same amount of things, this turns into like the farmers and the miners. So people will switch over from whatever job they have to this one that pays better, or they'll switch. Hold on, give me a second. I lost track of what I was doing. Yes, so the cheaper labor, right, becomes more expensive because there are fewer workers there, right? So as this firm, or as people as the non-discriminators start to take advantage of the market, we see that non-discriminators will actually reduce the size of the available work pool, meaning that the cheaper labor will actually just become more expensive over time. right? So if there were 100,000 people who were willing to work for if there were 100,000 people who were willing to work for $11.50, then suddenly we hire up 10,000 of them. Well, now the remaining are not the ones who are left want to work for $11.60, right? And so this price keeps going up as there are fewer and fewer people in that job pool. And eventually, in a non-discriminating case, we would end up where, one moment please. Kids are messing with the lights. Sorry about that. Okay, so, right. So as there are fewer and fewer black workers who will work for less money, eventually we'll get to the point where you will hire enough of them that this wage will equal this wage in a non-discriminating case. Now, if there is taste-based discrimination, then we may see these wages stagnate at this level, where WB is equal to WW minus some discrimination coefficient. Okay? So the discrimination coefficient is it's basically this price tag, right? We have, so in our case, we were looking at, here we had $11.50 per hour is equal to $12 per hour minus D. So if we add this discrimination coefficient to, no, you're not going to have to memorize the equation. If I'm going to ask you to use it, I'll probably just remind you of it. But let's see. Yeah, I might put it on a problem set, but if I put it on a problem set, I will also tell you what the equation is. Like I said, this isn't a math class. This is an understanding mathematical reasoning, sort of. So I don't want to make you memorize things. Okay? All right. So 1150 equals 12 minus D. So all we have to do now is add this D to both sides. So now we go, this goes here, and now it's D. And then we subtract 1150 from both sides. So D equals 50 cents per hour per worker, right? So we have this discrimination coefficient that we can now measure, okay? So what kinds of things might bring on this taste-based discrimination? How does this present? Is everybody kind of okay with the way that this works, right? Essentially what we have is we would expect in a non-discriminating world for this and this to be equal to each other. And when you argue with people who when you argue with people who believe the opening quote for the class, right? If women can make as much as, if women work just as hard as men and they're making less money, why wouldn't people hire all women? We're able to, the assumptions that they're making is basically this taste-based discrimination model, that there is, that market forces will eventually make these wages, these WB wages, into these WW wages. So they would expect this to happen. And they would expect this to happen largely because this discrimination coefficient is harmful to businesses. So the important thing to remember with taste-based discrimination is taste-based discriminator is not acting in their business's best interest. You can point out to a taste-based discriminator that they are shooting themselves in the foot by behaving in this way. All right? Now, how does this present? So there's a couple of different ways that we might see some kind of taste-based discrimination. Now, I think that one of them, and the one that I've been kind of using as a running example, is the employers themselves have discriminating preferences. Right? So this is the one that we've sort of been running with as the example. The employers themselves are the ones who are discriminating against their new hires. So what happens in this case? Well, okay, the other two types, we might also see taste-based discrimination. We'll do this first. Employers are not discriminating or employers have no preference, right? So they're still discriminating, but we're saying that they don't. It's not because of their personal preferences. But are appeasing employees. So say that somebody opens up a shop in a very racist part of the world, and they are coming from a not racist part of the world. They may see that it is in their best interest to, in fact, take on some discriminatory hiring practices in order to appease racist workforce. So we'll look at what that looks like. And then 3 is going to be employers appeasing customers. So what does that look like? The example I usually use is if you go into a Korean restaurant and a white guy comes up and takes your order, and everybody that you see working there is white, you might question how authentic the cuisine is, right? So we'll see what this looks like also here in just a moment. But these are the 3 different kinds that we're going to look at. Now, the first one, where the employer is the one doing it. What does the data look like? Data shows segregation in workplaces. All black or all white, for example. And there's a wage gap. Why is this? Well, remember how I showed you this up here before? This right here. We'll just go ahead and draw it again down here. This is the labor demand curve. So we had, let's see, this was W No, let me go back to here. All right. WW equals WB plus D. And then we have WB is down here, right? So we have these two different wages. We have either your black workers or your white workers. And what's going to happen is either the employer. So remember, we have employer has preferences. This means either they prefer WB or WW. Yeah, I can scroll up back up real quick. How about this? Is that enough, or do you need to go higher? All right. So what does this mean? Either the employer is going to want to pay. Okay, cool. Either the employer is going to want to hire the employer. If the employer is choosing between two workers, then the employer is choosing to pay either the white worker more, or they're willing to pay, or they want to hire the black worker, which includes that they don't have to pay them whatever the discrimination coefficient is. And they're going to make some choice of either or. And that either or choice is going to either mean that they hire all black workers or all white workers. Either they want all the black workers that they can hire because they're less expensive, or they're willing to pay more for white workers. You're not going to see a mixed group here, because when they're expressing, if they hire a black worker, right? So they hire the 11.50 per hour. Or say they hire someone for like 11.50 an hour, versus the white worker at 12.50 an hour plus 50 cents for discriminating. Or not 12.50, it's just 12. Either discriminating is worth 50 cents to them or it's not. It's not going to be like a case-by-case thing, right? So we'll either see we'll see segregation in the workplaces, and we'll see that there will be a wage gap that's caused as a result. And the wage gap will be equal to this 50 cents. All right, we ran out of time, so I will get into the rest of this next time, and then we'll talk about statistical discrimination. I can real quick just tell you that with employers, or if it's employees, we'll see segregation and no wage gap. And employers, and if it's what's the other one? Yeah, customers. I'll get to you in a second there, Macarena. Customers. It's going to be like segregated roles and no wage gap. So remember, this would just mean that all of your front of the house people in a Korean restaurant would have to be Korean, so that people will believe that the food is Korean, even if the entire cook staff is all white. right? So that's how we would do that. If we have, all right, and now let's see the answer to that. So you all are free to go. I'm going to go ahead and answer this quick question about the reading check. I have to pull it up quick. I have it right here. Assignment. The assignment to the reading check was, come on. All right, thanks. I hope this worked out for everybody. I think this is going to work out pretty good. I'll try to get better about staying on task and not reading the latest message gamer tag. It's actually the same thing. No Jose cool. All right, reading check. Here we go. All right, now what did I ask? Preview. Ah, yes. Okay. So the all right. Reading check. It was the question asked, Jules Pierre Mao is looking to hire a bodyguard for himself. He has 2 resumes, one from an Earther and one from a Martian. The resumes are incredibly similar as far as training and experience go. Mao hires the Earther because he believes the Earther is likely to be physically stronger and therefore more effective as a martial artist. Okay. Next we have, let's see, A, is it statistical discrimination or taste-based discrimination? A, this is going to be statistical. Remember, he's hiring someone who he thinks will be more effective, not because he thinks that like Martians are icky, right? He's hiring this Earther because he believes that that the Earther will be better at the job for a reason that's actually probably true. The Earther is going to be much stronger than the Martian, given that they operate in full Earth gravity instead of the 0.7 that you get on Mars. So this is statistical. B, what is it? Why is that? So if you're going to answer this question, you could just write A, statistical, B, choosing because Earthers are typically stronger. This would be more productive, right? Do I run trials? I don't run trials, no. And thank you, Raj. Yes, I think this went really well. Yeah. So I'll be standing by on Skype if anybody wants to one-on-one. And I do this. I'm going to be standing by on Skype for an hour before every class and for 30 minutes after every class. So if there's anything that you just want to discuss one-on-one, even if it's I'm really worried about this whole being locked down thing, just let me know. I'm free to talk. If I am talking to somebody already, I will make sure to send you a message that I'm currently speaking with someone, and I'll give you a time estimate. Okay? So yeah, I'll talk to you all on Wednesday, and I'll try to have this round of stuff graded for you. Thank you.